Welcome to the April 9th GS Counselor discussion from Greenwood Associates. Today we are going to be discussing Angela Duckworth's work, The Power of Persuasion and Perseverance. Was published in 2016, but her real entry onto the scene was in 2013 when she did a TED Talk, which is one of the most viewed TED Talks out there. It's a 6-minute TED Talk. I strongly encourage you watching it and encouraging your students and clients to watch it. It's very concise, but really gets across the point the importance of perseverance, of effort, and passion for a long-term goal. I found that her book in 2016 fleshed out a lot of ideas which she didn't have in her TED Talk. So I strongly encourage you to purchase her book and read it. It's uh, it's got a lot of vignettes. There's a lot more emphasis on how to engender grit, whereas in her TED Talk she said she didn't know how to engender grit. She got a lot further along in that research for her book, and her website also has a lot of valuable resources. The grit tests are on there, so if you ever wanted to administer it, you can download them. And there's different length ones. There's a 5 question, there's a 12 question, there's a one for kids, and there's also a lot of other resources. She's now created the Character Lab, which I would strongly encourage you to look at as well. But today, what we're going to be focusing on is grit and its application in career counseling. So, first of all, what is grit? In a sentence, grit is the combination of perseverance of effort and passion for a long-term goals. So, what her initial study was when she was looking into this was the West Point cadets. There are 1,200 cadets that spend, most of their lives trying to get into West Point, and then in the first 2 months before school starts, they have what's called the Beast, where they're subjected to things like gas chambers and grueling exercise and a very grueling list of activities. And ultimately what she was hoping to do was be able to predict who would be successful in that environment. Is there any way that we can predict who is successful under stressful situations? And prior to that, the military had come up with what's called the whole candidate score. And the whole candidate score is a series of things that they use to determine their talent for completing these tasks. So there's a lot in there about their standardized tests and their academic record, their high school ranking. There's actually an expert um, assessment of their leadership potential. And then there's all these physical fitness requirements and their scores on those. And all of those together are in the whole candidate score. And what this really does measure is the talent for the cadets being able to complete tasks that they will be asked to master at West Point. Well, she came along and she has the whole candidate score available to her, but her test was on just two things: passion and perseverance. And those two things, as we saw before, are what she considers grit. So she measured the cadets' grit. The findings from this initial study were that there was no correlation between the whole candidate score and grit. One did not presuppose the other in any way. The other thing that they discovered, and they knew for a long time, was that the whole candidate score was a poor predictor of success. It really had no ability to determine who was going to be successful in this, what they call the Beast or not. Yet, grit was a very accurate predictor of success. And the Beast has a 6% attrition. In the year that she was doing her study, 6% of the graduates failed out of West Point in the first 2 months. So this is something that the military would like very much to be able to predict more accurately. And she was very impressed with her findings, as was the world. So then she wanted to see if that grit also applied to other areas. But before I move on, does anyone have any questions about this initial study that she did at West Point? Okay. So the other areas of study that she was interested in were she looked at the sales and the sales market. She went to a timeshare, and there was a pool of candidates that were in this timeshare sales arrangement. And she was studying to see whether she could predict who would be able to last in this environment. And what she found was that there were two predictors of success in that sales environment. Previous experience in sales was a predictor of success, but so too was grit. She went to education and looked at graduation rates, and she found again there were two predictors of success: a supportive teacher and grit, both of which were predictive. In the Green Beret, very similar to the military, the cadets at West Point, she looked at who completed the training of the Green Beret, which is even far more grueling than the Beast at West Point. And she found that your baseline physical fitness when entering the training was a predictor, but so too was grit. And then she went to spelling bees and looked at rankings in national competitions and studied the students for whom went further in national competitions. And again, she found that hours of study and preparation and grit were predictors of success. And you can also argue that hours of study is a form of grit. So she's showing that grit really has application, not just in a military setting, but in an educational, career setting, and so forth. One of the things she says is our potential is one thing, but what we do with it is quite another. In the book, there's a little bit of interest in career direction, and she references a Gallop poll in 2014, which very disparagingly shows that more than 2/3 of adults in the U.S. are actively disengaged or not engaged at work. And then worldwide, the picture gets even worse, with only 13% of adults saying that they're engaged at work. Now, her thoughts on this are matching your job with what captures your attention and imagination is a good idea. It may not guarantee happiness and success, but it sure helps the odds. So she's saying that she thinks that there would be more engagement if people were actually interested in what they were doing. Her advice to young students who come up to her for career advice is to foster a passion. She talks a lot about graduation speeches and how the trope is follow your passion. And she says, I don't see that students have trouble following their passions. They have trouble identifying their passions. And so to foster a passion would be a better first step than to tell them to just follow their passions. So, yeah.
Dan, does she use the language around purpose as well?
You are 2 slides ahead of me.
Okay.
So
I'll be patient.
No, that's good. You're absolutely right. So passion, I'm building up to purpose. Passion is interchangeable for interest. Sometimes she calls it interest. Sometimes she calls it passion. Passion is certainly the word that engenders more emotion. And that's what she chooses to put in her definition, passion for a long-term goal. But as you'll see in her assessment, really what she's asking is, can you maintain interest for a long period of time? So the questions that are asked are more about longevity of interest, but when she's labeling it in her book, she's calling it passion. So we're going to switch to interest, okay? Just because passion can sometimes mean other things. But she references this 30-something poster on a Reddit forum who said, I have a fleeting interest in everything, but I have no career direction. And so she says, what does science say about developing interests? And her one sentence is, passion for your work, again, passion substituting interest, is a little bit of discovery followed by a lot of development, and then a lifetime of deepening. This is her summation of the psychology of interest. And she goes into a little bit more detail, showing that there's a discovery phase where this is more in the childhood where you play first, and she's a big advocate of students having unsupervised, autonomous play time that allows them to explore interests, and then cautions the parents not to expect expertise. Don't expect for them to necessarily want to become an expert in everything that they try. This is a period of exploration and discovery. Second is the development of those interests. Interests, and she says interests are not discovered through introspection. Instead, interests are triggered by interactions with the outside world. So she's really advocating that the students get out and do something. They don't sit around just thinking about it. Now, I would also add to this development phase finding out more information, doing career exploration. Learning about careers is an interaction with the world. It's getting out of yourself and learning about the world. And it's also interacting with that world. And then the deepening is that protracted period of development of interest. Now, reading this, it really made me think of John Holland's theory, which we discussed last month, and the first of the 4 working assumptions about how students have different predilections towards certain preferred activities. And all of those things are really, if we were to apply her ideas of interest to Holland, I think they're very much in alignment. That during the discovery phase, students are finding out what their preferred activities are. They're trying a lot of things. They're being influenced by a lot of cultural norms, and they're finding their preferred activities, at which those preferred activities turn into interests. Those interests turn into competencies. Those competencies turn into a personal disposition. I would say that this is the phase of development. So now they're developing who they are. And then, as we remember from John Holland, there's a virtuous cycle of then doing more of those preferred activities, getting greater competencies, and getting more expert. And this would be what she is calling a deepening of the interest. So I think there's a lot of congruency between how she's summing up career interests and what we learned about John Holland's working assumptions about the development of self and how that really develops who you are. There's another, we'll see also how there's parallels between these 2 theories as well. Any questions or any comments, thoughts? Okay.
No.
So she also talks about Warren Buffett. Apparently, he and his pilot were good friends, and he approached his pilot one day and says, I know you probably have greater aspirations than flying me around. And the pilot says, yes, I just don't know how to get there. Do you have any suggestions? And Warren Buffett said, well, I suggest that you write down a list of 25 career goals that you have, and then pick 5 of them. Choose only 5 of those goals, and then actively avoid all the other goals. Really focusing your interest on those things that are most important to you. Now, this is something we do in the Greenwood system, obviously, is try and get them to take their interests and focus them through a funneling of, a priority order. And so this is basically Jimmy Buffett's or Warren Buffett's suggestions to those that seek out his attention. Now,
You need to call Jimmy Buffett and ask what his methodology is.
it might be very, very different. You're absolutely correct.
Where's the bar?
Yeah, right. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? All right. So this is, and now we're to exactly where you were, Andrew, and this is where interest turns into purpose. And for this, she uses the parable of the 3 bricklayers. And so this church is being built, and the 3 bricklayers are being asked, what are you doing? And the first guy says, I'm laying bricks. The second one says, I'm building a church. And the third one says, I'm building the house of God. Now, the first one, we can consider that person has a job laying bricks. The second one has a career as a builder. The third one, however, has a calling. And the difference between these three is not what they're doing, but why they're doing it. And so this is important. And she really says that most people are able to self-select which of the three they are. And obviously, all of us would want to be doing something that we are called to do and for which we find great purpose. But a lot of people are just doing a job. And I know this is the work that we as career counselors are trying to help them decide is what is it that they really want to accomplish and help them find that purpose. And Andrew, I know that's exactly what you're doing through your work with the Treks is finding that purpose. So, you know, she definitely brings purpose into the conversation of grit. And not surprisingly, there is a high degree of correlation between purpose and your willingness to overcome obstacles, grit. So, you know, this is important. If you can help people find their purpose, they are more likely to be grittier. Here you can see there's, you know, a significant difference between those that don't feel like they're doing anything worthwhile, their grit is much lower, versus those that feel they're really imbibed with a sense of purpose. They are much more willing to work hard and overcome obstacles, and they're much more interested in what they do, which is grit in itself. So very important for them to have grit, or for them to have purpose. Now, she does address how to develop that purpose. She talks to a Stanford psychologist, Bill Damon, who says there's 4 parts to developing purpose. The first is it always starts with interest. Interest in something is always the, quote, spark that begins the development of purpose. But then, after they have an interest in something, it's important that they find role models. They observe somebody else who is doing something purposeful. Then they have to find a problem. They have a revelation that there's a problem that needs to be solved, but that's not good enough just to recognize the problem. They have to have a second revelation saying, I have the ability to make a difference in this problem. So it starts with interest. It then gets role modeled. Then they have to find what it is that they want to do, and then they have to realize that they have the ability to do something about it. Would you guys say that that's consistent with your work and what you know about purpose? Or I'm sure there are other parts of this. This is one person's understanding. Bill Damon, I guess, did a lot of studies about super successful people who are driven by things. And these are the characteristics that he found over and over and over again.
And Dan, I'd add that the observe someone who's purposeful, that's the informational interview. You know, that's part of the Greenwood system there. So that would be step number 2.
Yep. Right. Yeah, no, this actually does line up nicely. We first help them find what they're interested in. Then they go out and meet people who are doing that. I think you're absolutely right.
With an informational.
Any other thoughts on this development of purpose? I mean, this is really the crux move in career counseling, is helping them identify this. All other things kind of fall into place. Educational necessities, where they live, how they live, kind of flow from, if they're living a life of purpose, then they are going to be far more successful and happy than they will be if they are just doing a job like laying bricks.
Mm-hmm. It's good.
Okay, good. All right. So that's kind of where she goes with interest and passion and purpose. And again, the book is full of lots of really entertaining stories about people who do things and their life story. So again, I highly encourage the book. So then we have perseverance of effort. This is the second half of the equation of grit, the ability to overcome obstacles. And I love it that she says if she were to have one tattoo, it would be of the Japanese proverb, fall down 7 times, rise 8. And this is just basically you only have to get up one more time than you've been knocked down. And this is so important. And we know this to be the case, that kids who have exercised this muscle of having experienced difficulty and overcome those obstacles are far more successful. They have the ability to bounce back. And we don't often give kids the opportunity to get knocked down in a supportive, loving, caring environment. I'm not suggesting we inflict pain, but if you allow them to experience difficulties and they see that through effort they're able to overcome those difficulties, then they have a sense of agency in their abilities. And this proverb perfectly illustrates that you always get up one more time than you're knocked down. So she goes through that. She also, go ahead. Yes.
I remember in terms of child development, they tell parents to try to enumerate how many times their child has had to overcome some kind of adversity, and they want, I think I'm remembering the number 6. They want a child before they reach, they graduate from high school to have fallen down 6 times and gotten back up. That's what the research was recommending.
Yeah, we accomplish that by moving every couple of years to give our kids some adversity to overcome. We just built it into the family plan,
Just as soon as they got comfortable in a classroom and had friends, we ripped them out of there.
Yeah. On to the next job. The next thing that she referenced, which I absolutely love, is Henry Ford says, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Which I just, those that have a can-do attitude are able to. Those that don't think they can, don't. And she does spend a bit of time in the book talking about pessimism and learned helplessness, and this being really debilitating to being successful. And then, says there are times that therapy is necessary and that it's important to go to a therapist. She mentions cognitive behavioral therapy and its ability to modify your negative self-talk. So, and she goes into a little bit of depth about learned helplessness and how it can be learned if you are constantly inflicted with pain and you do not have the ability to change it. It does engender a sense of learned helplessness. And then they have to be taught that through effort they can overcome obstacles. I didn't know the research that had been done on the dogs where they were subjecting them to electrical shock, but for half of the dogs they had given them the ability to stop the shocks by giving them a button to press. So they'd make a sound, they'd start shocking, and the dogs figured out that if they press this button, the shocking would stop. The other half of the dogs didn't have the button, so they were just subjected to pain, and they had no agency to change it. It just happened, and they had no ability to affect it. They took these dogs after having trained them in this environment and then put them in another room. But in this room, they had a wall that was very high. It was able to be overcome by the dog, but it took great effort for them to jump over this wall. Then they took those 2 sets of dogs, the ones that had agency and the ones that didn't, put them in this environment and made the sound that they were going to shock the floor. And for the dogs who had been trained to press the button, they knew they could do something about it, and they jumped over the wall. The dogs that didn't have any ability to affect their pain before laid down and whimpered. because they knew they were going to get shocked and they knew that there was nothing they could do about it. They didn't even try to do anything about it. So this was important research in learned helplessness. And this is something that has to be overcome because it is a real thing. And there are plenty of people who have been subjected to pain that they really had no ability to affect. And if that's the case, they have been trained in a way that they need help to overcome that kind of learned helplessness. Any questions? Okay. And then growth mindset. There's a lot of congruencies between Carol Dweck's work and Dr. Duckworth's work. They can be talked about really in the same sentence because growth mindsets are grittier. And so a one page on growth mindset, basically Carol Dweck has figured out that intelligence and abilities are not fixed assets. They can grow. And that abilities such as math skills, athletic abilities can change, but it requires effort. Those that believe they can get better with effort do, and they have what's called a growth mindset, whereas those that do not believe that they can get better with effort don't even try, and they have a fixed mindset. So that's basically the work of Carol Dweck in a single slide. But you can see that having that agency, believing that with effort you can better yourself, is really a motivator to do better, to try, as opposed to if you go into it thinking, well, I'm just not talented in math, then you're not going to try harder. I'm not a good athlete, so I'm not going to try. But anybody can be better with effort. Now, can we all be in the NBA? Well, no, not all of us are 6'9". So you can desire to be an NBA athlete, and that may not be possible because there is a certain amount of external factors and talent that factor into the equation. But you certainly can be maybe the best on your team, or make the starting team by really trying hard. But if you think yourself not able to change what you think is a fixed asset, then you have no ability and are less likely to try. Any other thoughts on the confluence between grit and growth mindset? Okay. All right. This I liked in her book because it also illustrates how effort is important. And she says effort counts twice. So she points to the popular belief that talent logically leads to achievement, that if you're talented in something, you must achieve great things in it. When we all know that not to be true, but we are all, and she calls it, distracted by talent. We think in terms of talent. And actually, we think in terms of talent sometimes more in some cases rather than others. She uses the example of a research study where they took a pianist who was playing a piece of music, and they told the people who were watching this person play the music that the first one was very talented and listened to him play, and the second one, they said, well, he wasn't as talented, but boy, he put a lot of effort into learning how to play this piece. Now, little did they know it was exactly the same kid playing exactly the same piece, just different parts of the same piece. And when people thought that the first one was more talented, they gave greater kudos to the talented individual rather than kudos to the individual who was thought to have worked hard to get there. So there are some places where we become, as she says, distracted with talent. But the reality is that talent is only turned into a skill through effort. You may have a talent, but unless you apply effort to it, it doesn't actually become a skill. And skills by themselves are not achievement. You have to apply effort to your skills before you can truly achieve anything. So this is where she has come up with the idea that effort is doubly important. It's twice as important as talent, because talent can only get you to the point where you have skill. And skill alone does not mean achievement. further effort needs to be applied to skill before you can see achievement. Now, this is where she starts getting into how to engender grit within yourself or your child. And one of the things she says is that culture is, as defined by shared norms and values of a group of people, powerfully shape just about every aspect of our being. So if this is, and we know this to be true, we are social creatures. We conform to the in group. And once we join a group and we want to be part of the in group, we do what's necessary to be in that in group. So she has the very simple solution of make sure you join a culture that emulates the type of person you want to be. I hope you guys can still hear me, Andrew. Doesn't look like I've lost you. It looks like you've just gone mute. Okay. Yep, that's fine. So it's important to join a culture that emulates the person you want to be. He uses the example of elite swimmers, and these elite swimmers have 4:30 swim practices. And, at first, the person who was studying was like, what crazy person wakes up at 4 o'clock to do swim practice for multiple hours before the day? And then he realized that everyone those people know are also waking up at 4 o'clock. They don't know any different. It just becomes habit. And it's only habit forming if everyone you know does it. Otherwise, you have to summon up all that grit yourself and wake up and do this. But if you join a culture that does it, it just becomes much easier to engender. Dan,
I'll interject there. I was raised as an elite swimmer.
Yes.
And I had a college girlfriend that came to a swim practice, and at the end she goes, that was just one huge social hour.
Yep.
She didn't want to get in the pool, but
Right. Yeah, no, it's important. And this we know to be true too. I mean, as a head of independent schools, this is what I would tell the parents. Look, you're sending your kid to a place where the norm is that homework is important. Academic achievement is valued. The kids are all going to be trying to do well. And it will just become part of your kid's DNA to want to do well and to be willing to do more homework than everyone else in all the other schools, because that's what they're all doing. So, it's important that you really do put your students and kids in situations where the norm is how they want to operate. This again goes right back to John Holland's work, where he says the environment affects your behavior, and the behavior is determined by the environment, or by the collection of people creating the environment. So this is, again, a very close parallel between these two theories, that it is important that you find the right environment, and then put yourself in an environment where you are going to be better just by simply being there and adopting the norms of the culture. Okay.
I was thinking on that, the last slides, in terms of the talent and the effort leading to skills, the double effort, and this just crisis around top tier college admissions, and everyone basically trying to short circuit the process by saying, well, you get in based on talent by hook or crook, literally, and then all works out. It's like we're trying to skip the effort piece there. But then you get to this, our IECA endless conversation about the match here, where we're really trying to get past that and offer a path to more qualitative experience that leads to environments with that effort.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. We are distracted by the elite, and thinking that is the way forward, that put them in an elite institution and wash your hands, baby, because it's all done. It's downhill from there. And the reality is that we know that, it has more to do with what you do in school rather than which school you go to. And if there are opportunities for you to do things you love in the school that you go to, and you do them, you will be more successful. And it doesn't have to be an elite institution. And it could be that the academics at an elite institution maybe overwhelm your ability to participate in the activities that you want to do. And if you were in a less rigorous academic environment, you could explore more of those other interests, which we know to be important, and join those communities and assume leadership roles in those environments where you are accepted and valued. I use my son as an example of putting him in an environment where he's very granola and very, for lack of a better term, a hippie, and he's at Santa Cruz, and but because who he is such a great match with that environment, he becomes the head of his fraternity, the president of his fraternity, and as an activity, as a fundraiser, they're making jewelry, wrapping jewelry for St. Jude's. And here's a situation where there are probably not many presidents of fraternities wrapping jewelry with their fraternity brothers to raise money. But because the environment is such a good fit for him, and everyone values St. Jude's and beauty and are less worried about the cultural norms of gender stereotypes, you have a situation where he can thrive. So I think it is important that you really make that match. And the endless conversations IECA has about the match are well-founded in research and experience. But it is unfortunate that we're in this place now where there has been this terrible perpetration of a fraud that's so public. And it is bringing to the fore, the highlight, this idea that we are distracted by, what it means to be at an elite institution. So yeah, I think you're right, Andrew. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, so then the question becomes, how does Dr. Duckworth measure grit? And so she has, as I mentioned before, on her website, a number of grit assessments. They are self-report assessments. And for consistency of interest, they ask questions like, my interests change often, I become interested in new pursuits regularly. And you're given a Likert scale of very much like me, to not at all like me. And they answer those questions. It's a Likert scale of 1 to 5. And then the other half of the questions have to do with perseverance of effort. I'm a hard worker. I finish everything I begin. And it's really the mathematical mean, the average of those two scores. And the scores go from 1, which would be, they change interest in everything and they don't want to work hard at all, to 5, which is they never change their interests and they finish everything they begin. Now that's a self-report, and one of the things that she says emphatically, and we all know to be true, this would not be a good assessment to use in a high stakes situation. You could not use this for hiring purposes because it is so easily gamed. Everyone knows what the right answer is. And so it's very easy to give yourself a perfect score. And in high stakes situations, you're less likely to be honest than you would be if you were doing this for your own edification. So what's interesting about this is it is a self-report, and it has limited applications because it is a self-report. So what she did was come up with another means by which grit could be identified, and she calls it the Biodata Activities Grid. And what she does is she looks at performance, and this is a high school-based one, but it can also be used for college. And basically what she's asking is, what activities were you in? How many years were you involved? And what was your highest position held in that position? And the scoring works like this. If you do it for more than 1 year, you get a point. You can see this individual was student class president, so he rose to a very high level of status, but he only did it for 1 year. So the fact that he didn't do it for 2 years means that it really doesn't count at all towards grit. Grit has to be done over multiple years. And then you can see while he was at soccer all 4 years, he gets 1 point for having done it more than 1 year. And then because he was captain, he gets 2 additional points for having risen to the highest level of leadership in that activity. So there's a total of 3 points there. Now, he also worked in a daycare for 3 years, but left as the same assistant that he was when he started. He never ascended to any positions of power or were giving any more responsibility. So the fact that he did it for multiple years gives him 1 point. Had he ascended, maybe not to class teacher, but maybe in charge of all the other assistants, that would have been a middle level of advancement, at which point he would have gotten another point, at which point he would have gotten 2. So there's 3 levels of position. There's just being in it, there's a middle level of leadership, and then there's the highest level of leadership, and then it has to be done for multiple years. And that's how you can come up with the biodata activities grid. Now, what I would have loved to have seen is the normative data for this. What does a 4 out of 9 mean? You know, because you could see a student could get 0 points. If they never did an activity for more than 1 year, they would never get any points. Or if they did 3 activities for more than 1 year and rose to the presidency of each of those activities, they could have a total of 9 points. So the scale is from 0 to 9. The question for us, of course, is what does a 4 mean versus, you know, a 7 versus a 2? And that normative data has not been made available. But you can take, or at least let me put it this way, I've not found it. And I would love to find it. But anyway, this one is more performance-based, so it gets away from that problem of self-report. And this, of course, is what schools are using to determine the the activity level of the students for whom they are trying to recruit. So,
well, I just the question of anxiety. You know, I had another call. Actually, it was a friend in Portola Valley, and telling me a story about her daughter was one of the last as a junior not to be on meds, and then all of a sudden she cracked as well. And you've got these just go. So her on the surface, her grid score would be amazing, but she's edging closer and closer to basically a breakdown. How do we judge that?
yeah.
No, I missed that. I missed what was the beginning?
He's basically
saying, judging anxiety.
Yeah, the resume building leading to mental illness. And while the resume may look great, it may have taken its toll on a student's anxiety level, stress level, and impacted their well-being. Yeah, no, I think that is certainly.
And, you know,
Go ahead, Mom.
No, go ahead, hon.
No, please.
There's a delay here.
I understand. Go ahead.
All right, you know, the high school resume sheet, everybody has that, correct? The high school resume. It would be interesting. I am now going to look at I'm now going to score my high school resume sheet. The only problem that I have is why the president of the senior, you know, I have so many kids that have done things just for 1 year. And you might even look at that in terms of them trying new things, you know, to try to find their passion. And they're getting dinged for that in this regard. I think even trying something for 1 year should count for something, and especially if you're senior class president. But no, seriously, why I tried to look this up to see why she didn't give someone who tried something, at least trying something for 1 year, again, trying to find your passion, why that counted for nothing.
I
So
think,
that would be,
yeah, I think that basically the whole idea of grit is that it is over a period of time. Now, what we know to be true is it's very young at the age of 14 to find your passion and then to stick with it. You're very lucky if you join the theater group in ninth grade and fall in love with it and do it for all 4 years. That's unusual. But we also know that that's what's valued in college admissions. That's why we encourage our kids to get involved. And then if there's any ability to enjoy it, we encourage them to stick with it. The, we know the Ivies to not be looking for the person who tried four different things 4 different years. That is not valued by them. They want laser-like focus and achievement in
yeah,
a specific area, and that is hard to do if you're spreading yourself thin and trying to be the captain of the soccer team and play first chair violin. They would prefer that you get good enough to play on their soccer team, which means you're an elite player, or become first chair violinist. Getting half points for being moderately good at both, we know, is not what they're looking for. But they have to have some way to differentiate all the kids who have lots of activities. And so I sympathize with them. There's many more kids who have lots of different activities. And while we know that to be healthy, they have to make some kind of decision. And if they've got one of those, or they've got a pool of those, and they've got a very select few who have coded something and written their own game, and that game is sold 10,000 copies, that's more impressive and far more unusual. But they have to find a way to select a very unusual set of kids.
yeah. And my only other thought, in high school, I think trying something 1 year should get a point. In college, I think that it resonates with me better for college, sticking with something, whatever, than high school. And I just would have loved her to have given 1 point. I mean, just to see if, you get nothing for being senior class president. I think that's ridiculous.
Right.
But anyway.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
the scale would go a lot higher. It would be, or I guess yeah. Anyway, so that's an interesting, and we do have the high school resume, so we do capture this information and try and leverage it in the Greenwood system by looking for those areas where they have not only done it for multiple years but excelled in it, and that gives us an insight into some of their not only character but their specific interests. Okay.
Jana raises an interesting question, just thinking about these scenarios of in grit. So let's say I run for junior class president and I lose. And then I turn around at the end of the year and I run for student body president as a senior and I win. That demonstrates, but nowhere, unless I write an essay about the experience, nowhere does a college or an elite college know kind of what my path was to that 1 year presidency.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think that,
yeah,
I think with measures, there are just
Excellent.
inevitable weaknesses. You're trying to take something that's very amorphous and quantify it. So I can sympathize with her need to create rules, and then and I encourage you to do this. It's very interesting how she does it online. She has to not only ask you what your activities are, but then she has to educate you as to how to give it 2 points or 1 point, in the an additional point for just participation or an additional point for that middle level. So she says, if you play a sport and you get to the varsity, then you get another point for being on varsity. If you get to be captain, then you get another point for being, the pinnacle of the leadership. So she has to teach you how to do this for you to be able to self-score it. So already built into this is some real interesting assessment jujitsu, but I think she does it really well. And then you're able to kind of give yourself a score. Um, but you're right. It doesn't perfectly capture the totality of what you are doing. It also doesn't, you know, it doesn't give you credit for waking up every morning and feeding your younger siblings and cooking them dinner every night. That's not one of the things that are options. That you can say, well, I was head of household. How gritty is that? But that's not valued in this assessment because there's not really a place for it. It's hard for that to be quantified. But I agree with you, Andrew. Okay, then there's this other truism, or what she's found in large data sets, is that with age comes grit. So you can see that there's like a 10% rise naturally in grit as a population over the lifespan, from 25 to 65 and older, which isn't surprising. I think we all become a little bit more focused and a little bit more able to overcome obstacles when we're older than when we're younger. But this is something that is also interesting about the study of passions and perseverance over time. All right. So in the Greenwood system, as I've kind of demonstrated throughout this process, we very much believe in and use the theories in grit, helping our clients find that passion and purpose. So we have the values and motivators clarification. We have the passions and purpose synthesis statement. So we're very much concentrated on helping them figure out what it is they're interested in and what's most important to them, and trying to create a narrative that really typifies who they are. I would also add that through the structured interview, you're asking them about their interests and about their activities. In the high school resume, they're going through their activities and how long they've done them and what leadership roles they've taken. And all of that is them verbalizing and having to rethink about these things. This all is part of the intervention to help them come up with who they want to be. Rather than just asking them the end question, who do you want to be? We're helping them reminding them of who they are, and then asking them what's important, and then creating a narrative. So this is very much what we want to do. And I know, Andrew, it keys in nicely with what you're doing on your treks. And that's why there's this nice confluence of us both, trying to get to the same place. And together, it's a really strong way to get to that. And Dana, I know that, you're working with students and helping them figure out what colleges they should go to or what jobs they should pursue, what education they should get or training. And it starts with, let's find what you're passionate about. Let's find what your purpose should be, and then it'll all fall in line based on that. We also encourage that interaction with the world to clarify and deepen their interest, that development phase and that discovery phase. We want them to get more information about the different careers. So there are a lot more careers than our kids know about. They've not been exposed to all of them. So through the Greenwood system, they are exposed to them, and we give them the tools to explore them. We also then, as you mentioned before, Mom, we encourage them to go out and observe people doing it. Find those mentors. Observe those people who are being purposeful and excited about what they're doing. And then we encourage them to get internships and volunteer and get jobs along those lines. So we very much are thinking that this is not something that's done in isolation or in an office. There's initial work done in the office, and then they need to go out into the world and experience it and deepen their understanding and continue to grow their interests. And then, as you well know, we are very much interested in teaching our clients about grit while they're going through the Greenwood system. We're encouraging them to find an interest, find what they love, telling them the importance of that if they find what they love and they stick with it, they will become an expert. If they're constantly moving from disparate job to disparate job, they're going to be starting over, and they're not going to have that achievement that they would if they really could find it out what it is they want to do and do it. And then, as I tell all of my students, and I'm sure you tell all of yours, there will be obstacles. Things will happen that are bad. And it's not a question of if they happen, it's a question of what you're going to do when it does happen. And that's that fall down 7 times, get up 8, because you will be knocked down and you will have to get up. And if you don't, then you're down for the count. If you do, you will get stronger, better able to handle new scenarios and become grittier, which we know is a very important part of becoming successful. Great. What do you guys think? Any closing thoughts that you have?
Another great webinar. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
I appreciate all the work you put into bringing this together. It's helpful.
Yeah, well, thank you. I find it very helpful to put it together in a presentation, as you well know.
Yeah.
You certainly learn things better when you have to teach them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not that I'm going to pay a lot more attention to the high school resume.
Good. So you're changing practice. This is perfect.
There you go. All right.
All right, guys. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And we'll see you next month. And we look forward to working with you as you work with your clients. It's really a pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you and work together to help, help people get grittier, help people lead more healthy lives, more successful, fulfilled lives. Okay?
Thanks, guys.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Dana.